the biggest constraint is what do you need for reagents or materials, the liquids that you might use for any experiment? What if it floats away? What if it gets in someone's eye? Because things always float away in space. There's notoriously panels in the space station where you don't want to look behind because it's got a little fungus, or if food has gotten stuck there and sometimes found months and months or years later. So things float around. So
The little things.
it just and so if you have anything you need to do your experiment that's a liquid or a solid, whatever that is, it has to go through toxicity testing. And the big question is, if this thing, whatever you want to use, gets in someone's eye, will they lose their vision or be really injured? And if the answer is yes, it doesn't mean the answer you can't use it. It just means if the answer is yes, you have to then go through multiple levels of containment. There's a glove box on the space station where you can actually do experiments that have triple layers of containment. So you can still use some harsh reagents, but you have to do them in that glove box. And so, but you can propose almost anything. The biggest challenge is the weight. If it's a heavy, it's $10,000 per kilogram to get something up into space. One of the ones we worked on actually with Kate Rubins was putting the first DNA sequencer in space called the Biomolecular Sequencer Mission, also with Aaron Burton and Sarah Castor-Wallace. But there, the interesting thing is we had to prepare this tiny little sequencer. It sequences DNA. You can do it really quickly within really minutes. And what's extraordinary is you have to do, if you want to get a piece of machinery up there, you have to do destructive testing. So you have to destroy it, see what happens. How does it destroy? What, do little pieces of glass break everywhere? If so, that's a problem. So you have to redesign it. And do fire testing. How does it burn? How does your device explode in a fire, or doesn't it? You have to test that, and then you do vibration. So far, it's almost all manual, just because the robots have to all undergo the destructive fire and vibrational testing. Yeah, at the end of 500 years, I'm hoping we make the big launch towards another solar system, really driven by the fact that we now actually have exoplanets that we know we might be able to get to and survive on, whereas 20 years ago, we really had almost none, certainly none that we knew were habitable. And exoplanets, even just discovered, didn't start to happen until 89 and really the early 90s for the real validated ones. So, I'm hoping over the next 500 years we go from thousands of possible habitable planets to hundreds of thousands or millions. Especially with some of the recent telescopes launch, we'll find them. But before we get there, I have a whole section I really describe about the magic of Titan, because it has all this methane, which is a great hydrocarbon you can use to make fuel. It's cold as all bejesus on Titan. It's a favorite. It's this kind of eerie, green-hued moon that's around Saturn. This large. It has it's so cold. It has these methane lakes, where the methane normally is a gas, but there it actually be so cold it's like a lake of methane. You could go swimming in it potentially. There might be some degree of rocks or maybe mountains there, but they might also be made of frozen methane. So no one's ever actually, no person's obviously been there, but it is, have enough satellite imagery and some data that you could actually potentially survive on Titan. So I think that'd be one place where I'm hoping that we would at least have a bit of an outpost. It might not be a luxurious retreat because it's really cold. It's basically, it was 1967 was the first large-scale agreement between major international parties, particularly the U.S. and Russia, but also many others, to say that space should be a place for humanities to not militarize it, to not weaponize it, to not militarize it. Also establish some of the basic sharing principles between countries who are going into space. And there was a plan to make an additional act in the 90s, the lunar. Actually, I'm blanking on the name of it, but there hasn't been any significant legislation that has been universally accepted since the Space Act. We have it's a really fun project, XMP, the Extreme Microbiome, which is, as it sounds like, we look for really odd places, like heavy radiation environments, high salt, high or low temperature, strange area at the space station, for example, lots of radiation and microgravity, places where organisms can evolve for interesting adaptations. And some of them have been organisms we've seen, like at a candy pink lake in Australia called Lake Hillier, which we just published a paper on this.
Why is it pink?
So it's actually Danilia salina is one of these organisms. There's a mixture of bacteria and some algae that are there that make it bright pink. So they actually make carotenoids, these really sort of orangey and kind of pink molecules when you look at them in the light. So if you get enough of the bacteria, it becomes pink. So and it's not just pink; it's like bubblegum pink, the lake. And so we that's just an odd. It's a halophile, means that it grows in 30% salt. Mm-hmm. And if you go below 10-15% salt, it doesn't even grow. It actually kills it. When you think of your DNA,
right?
What are you supposed to do with it? Which is kind of the value of life. But if Hal was a silicon-based version of genetics, which is just his own maintenance of himself and self-survival, you could argue he's doing the right thing for himself. But I think a human in that circumstance might have tried to find a way to, even if the astronauts don't agree with the mission, to figure out somebody to get them on a different spacecraft to go away or something, versus just say, well, you're in the way of the mission, you have to die, is, I think, but accommodation can always be made, to your point with doctors. Like sometimes you'd like to save 3 people, but you can only save 2.
Yeah.
And you have to at some point pick. But I think in that sense, it's a false dichotomy. I think HAL wasn't programmed to and didn't try to find a third solution. If you're too confident, you won't see the other options. If you have too much doubt, you won't move. You'll be paralyzed by the options most people experience every day. We all love the concept of being a steadfast, resolute leader, making big decisions quickly and without question. But at the same time, we know people can be blinded to things they're missing if they're too headstrong. So I think I would include other, because HAL is one program, much like we do for humans. You get feedback from other humans before you make a decision that affects all of them. So I think HAL could have gotten feedback from other AI systems that said, well, are there other options here, and done it probably very quickly. Or you could even embed a programming system where the AI has a primary function, but at times of uncertainty, queries a series of other programmed AIs to ask for a consensus, almost like a democracy of the AI. But since it's all programmed, you could bring it all together and say there's a primary, but it only activates the parliament, if you will, for a decision when needed. Now, I don't know how you program dramatically different AIs all in one system that are different enough, but yeah, conceptually it's possible. Of course, that can lead to logjam, and government and parliament doesn't do anything, or Congress doesn't do anything. So there's trade-offs, but it's one idea. There's a lot of great work being done on longevity. I have one of my companies itself works on longevity. It's called Onegevity, and so I'm working on myself on ways to improve how we monitor health and wellness now and live longer, live better. Many people are doing this. This is what the whole purpose of medicine is to a large degree. But I don't think we'll live. In the book, I propose we might get out to live to 150 years. I think that's reasonable. But say humans are going to live to be 200, 300, 400, 500 years, or some people. I meet people like this every week who say, I think I'm not going to die. To which I always say, I hope you're right, but I think you should plan that you're not going to be right. But I want people, also, as we mentioned earlier, that being immortal would really fundamentally change the social contract and how you plan, and how you allocate resources. Not necessarily bad, but it would just be different. But I also just think we don't know yet of any way to undo the ravages to the human body that occur over time. We can repair some of it, replace some of it, but it's okay to assume that you're going to die, and not just assume, know you're going to die, because then you have a bit of liberty about what you can do quickly and do next. Like in the Kurzweil singularity, where we all have this rapture-like moment and we go up and upload into the cloud and live forever. I don't know if it would still be the same as what we consider the view of self in this flesh form. If we could really get a complete representation of a person's entire personality up into digital form, that would be immortality, basically. You really define an individual as not just your own thoughts and your own self-reflection, but we're almost, he argues, more defined by how other people see it. See, like, if you walked out into the world and say suddenly nobody knew who you were, recognized you, you would be, in some regards, deceased, right? If everyone just suddenly had massive amnesia and no one knew who you are, never remembered, no memory of anything you'd ever done together, you'd be very alone. You'd be basically, starting from scratch, like as if you'd just been born, basically. So, and also he writes thought experiments, like what if half of your neurons get replaced with half of someone else, or a quarter, or 60%? At what point do you stop being you and become the other person? And the argument he makes is it's more than just what percentage of your neurons are swapped out. It's also the relationships you have with so many people that partly define you. No, not completely, but they're a key component of how you view yourself, how to view what you are in the world. And, and he actually goes so far to say that they're probably, more important than even what's in your head. Like if you swap out, all of your thoughts, but when you walk out into the world, everyone still treats you and talks to you the same way. It's this memory of what you are. That is still like an entity that's defined you, even if all of your, there's even movies like Trading Spaces about this with Eddie Murphy, or like the ideas of people who can swap bodies. The reason those are comedies is because they're fish out of water comedies.